You're watching our special broadcast on the third anniversary of what is turning out to be the longest war in Europe since the Second World War. On your screens, viewers, are those live visuals coming in of European leaders who have descended in Kiev to, well, express their moral outrage, because at this stage, that's best what they can do. There are some experts who feel that the communication lines that President Trump has established with President Putin should have been done earlier, if for nothing else but for the sake of thousands and thousands of people who've lost their lives on both sides, in Ukraine and in Russia. On your screens are some of those live visuals. That is the EU chief Ursula von der Leyen, who's met Volodymyr Zelensky a short while back. Everybody has come to Kiev, but even as questions still remain. United Nations General Assembly is set to vote on two competing resolutions, marking 3 years since this what started as a limited military invasion and activity inside Ukraine. The United States is urging member states to support its draft resolution, which calls for a swift end to the war but does not mention Russia's troop withdrawal. Washington is also asking countries to reject a rival resolution that's backed by Ukraine and the European allies, which demands that Russia withdraws and goes outside the Ukraine territory. The vote comes as President Trump pushes to broker peace with Russia, raising concerns in Europe that they are being completely sidelined. This comes even as President Macron, who will be followed by the Polish president and then the UK Prime Minister, to ensure that they have at least a seat on the table to remain relevant. Let's quickly now get in guests joining me for this special discussion to talk more about it. I have with me Miss Victoria, who's joining me on the show. I also have Nicholas Nugent as well as Tatiana, who's joining me to talk more on this. In fact, Tatiana, let me start with you. As things stand right now, the more they change, the more they remain the same. Yes, we are talking about some sort of a peace momentum, that there may be some sort of a momentum towards a possible peace solution. But the fact is, there is no peace.
Well, Gauri, good day to you. But as far as I'm concerned, I think that you're talking about peace. We here in Moscow are talking about a normalization of relationships between Moscow and Washington and a possibility of a negotiation. Not about peace per se, because we've had, if we go back to 2014, we had an agreement. That's why, I've been sitting here tuned into this broadcast for half an hour, because you connected me a long time ago. For some reason, everybody keeps talking that, well, Russia wants assurances. Of course, Russia wants assurances. We had a negotiation that lasted overnight, and every journalist in the world was tuned in for hours and hours. And then the world leaders, Angela Merkel at the time, the greatest by far leader in the past, at least decade that Europe has seen. And everybody was saying, look, we have an agreement, and the Minsk agreements were broken almost the next day by Ukraine. So we had a very nice agreement in place that never stood, because Ukraine said, okay, this is on paper. In reality, we're going to continue killing people in Donbass. And this is, again, something that you and your correspondents, even the correspondent in Moscow, which I'm actually appalled to hear, is kind of omitting from this report altogether.
Tatiana, at least you will not, you will at least appreciate the fact that we are being balanced and representing the two sides. I gave as much time to the correspondent from Moscow.
Oh God, no. I will never agree to that.
Than the one in Ukraine. Anyhow, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question and give you enough time, Tatiana, which is that the crux of the issue comes down to just that. Reading of an issue differently by Ukraine and Russia, which is the 2014 agreement that you're referring to. Let me now move ahead and ask about, you're saying that it's about normalization of relationship between US and Russia. Where does then Ukraine and by extension NATO figure in this?
Ukraine doesn't figure anywhere in the US-Russia relations. It doesn't have, a place in this, because a bilateral relation is a bilateral by definition. If we're talking about NATO and what President Zelensky said yesterday, that he's ready to give up his presidency, but only if Ukraine is included into NATO, this is, again, a part of his very populistic discourse that he continues in order to, first of all, continue moralizing, his countrymen, which I can do nothing but commend him for. He's been very good on the media front. That's something that we cannot take away from him. But it is talking for the sake of talking. This is pure populism.
Okay. Nicholas, respond to what Tatiana just said, which is that, well, at the end of the day, it's a bilateral relationship between America and Russia, something that whole of Europe is appalled over, something that Ukraine is not being able to digest because, they feel they should have a seat at the high table as well. They don't have one right now. But is this how this entire issue is now going to be dealt with between President Putin and President Trump?
Well, look, let's take a step back. And much though I appreciate the way you're bringing together representatives from different countries, that's full marks to you. We're not doing the negotiation here. And speaking for myself, I can only observe what's going on. I'm not going to find fault. I'm not going to criticize what happened in 2014 or indeed what's going on now. So if I look at what's going on now, I would agree with Tatiana that the positive side is that, and indeed Sir Martin Sorrell moments ago, the positive side is that Russia and America are talking in a way they haven't been talking for quite a long time. And that surely must be a prerequisite for any advance towards peace. Yes, Europe are rather up in arms about that because they've been left out. But we've got time. Things will change. The starting point, as I say, was that Russia or America starts talking to Russia again, which is absolutely crucial. We've got the European leaders in Kiev today. We've got other European leaders visiting Washington this week. So it's quite a critical week as to what goes on. Yes, I sit here in Europe and I have my concerns at the way there seems to be a wedge in NATO, because NATO, which, to be blunt, was born the same year I was. In other words, it's kept the peace in Europe as we see it for all those years. There is an argument that NATO is outdated and we need some new security apparatus for Europe. Perhaps that will emerge from this. But we are in a little bit of a sort of démarche since the Riyadh talks between Russia and America. Europe doesn't quite know where it stands, but we are close to the source of the conflict. We in Europe have the biggest reason for wanting to see peace. And frankly, in my own country, in Britain, we would rather be talking to Russia again. Let me say that to Tatiana. And by the way, may I also add that I've spent quite a lot of time in the Donbass. So I do know the territory we're talking about, which used to be Ukraine-controlled and is now Russian-controlled. So I've got quite strong views on that, but I'm trying to keep my personal opinion out of this.
Okay, so very important takeaways.
What is going on?
Absolutely, very important takeaways here on the show. We earlier had Martin Sorrell also, sitting in London, who said, well, these conversations should have happened earlier. You have Nicholas here, who's also saying, well, UK would prefer to speak to Russia, but of course, right now it's not being able to. And of course, you have these European leaders all taking turns to come and meet President Trump to at least, of course, remain relevant. Victoria, where does that put Ukraine? President Trump is clear there are going to be no American boots on ground. He's also very clear this is pretty much now an equation between Trump and Putin. Where does that leave? Forget Zelensky, Ukraine in this.
That leaves us with a very pro-Russian, as of now at least, pro-Russian position, unfortunately. And excluding the main country that is being invaded is weird, to say the least. I'd say geopolitically hilarious to a point. Ukraine's main issue with that is that we have no guarantees whatsoever, whether or not it's about the rare materials found in our land, or it is something about the guarantees, the peace talks, basically anything geopolitically related. Ukraine is out of it. So we are not happy with that. It repeats over and over again, and we know to what result it led previously in 2014. And it's not satisfactory, and we have this war right now because of those talks. We are in danger of repeating that mistake again.
Okay, I'll give a chance to Tatiana to respond. Only one request. Let's not make it a slanging match. But Tatiana, I give you the chance to respond to what was just said by Victoria.
Well, I don't see how you would consider what I said a slanging match. Look, Victoria's, again, twisting the reality, unfortunately. Yes, we did see what the 2014 talks resulted in. It resulted in the increase in the anti-terrorist operation, as Kiev called it, which was basically killing Russian-speaking population in the Donbass, which is, again, what led to the Donbass and to other regions. Let us not forget there were 4 regions of Ukraine that demanded or requested to join Russia, which was then why this special military operation started, because these regions joined Russia, they voted, and we are still defending that population that asked to join the country. So let's please keep that in mind, you know, when it comes to your very balanced broadcast.
Okay. You know, Nicholas, then let me ask you this question that, you know, you mentioned about the fact that Europe needs to now, of course, invest more in terms of its security. Even the bare minimum 2% of GDP that NATO has mandated is not being addressed to by several European leaders. In the wake of the fact that America has made it absolutely clear that there will be no boots on ground for America, no guarantees being made in America, and America will not be funding any security guarantees in Europe, specifically for Ukraine. Are we then looking really at a ceasefire agreement which would just become the permanent solution? Or are we really hopeful of a long-term peace solution here?
Well, to your first question, I would say I simply don't know. To your second question, yes, I hope we're looking at a long-term ceasefire peace. Obviously, that's the prize. That's what everybody wants. An end to this interminable war, 3 years on. But you're trying to get me to predict quite what's going to happen, and I've no idea. We're getting all sorts of suggestions of a peacekeeping force, but where does the peacekeeping force go? Along the front line, the current front line? And if so, who should be making up that peacekeeping force? Should it be from one side or the other, or should it be neutrals? I would be inclined to say it should be made up of people from countries not involved in the conflict. But what do I have to say? I mean, I'm just speculating, or indeed I'm reading the speculation. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen in stages, and we've seen stage 1. As I say, the Americans talking to the Russians is stage 1. Stage 2, you could say, is pressure from the Europeans towards the Americans not to exclude them. But at what point Russia and Ukraine talk to each other, I don't know. Is that going to be within a week or two, or is it going to take rather longer? Because you're not going to begin to solve this conflict until the two participants are talking to each other. It's really a question in my mind as to how we get to that point, who forces people to that point. And that's why I'm being quite positive about the fact that Mr. Putin is talking to Mr. Trump. That seems to be the beginning of
beautiful friendship.
America, let's say America talking to both sides. Yes, it doesn't look like it has a very cozy relationship with Ukraine at the moment, which is disappointing to those of us who are close to the source of the conflict and are very keen to see an end to it.
All right, I have to leave it there. Thank you so much, all three of you, for taking out the time and joining me on this special broadcast.